And joining us now from Munich is former Deputy Canadian Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. She is now Economic Development Advisor to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Thank you so much for being with us. This conference marks the first gathering of world leaders since the president here, President Trump, upended alliances and publicly criticized world leaders at Davos. I'm wondering, as we just heard from Inez about this new era, what is the tone of this conference toward the United States this time?
Well, look, it's just the first day, but Chancellor Merz of Germany, I think, set what is going to be the tone we hear from the Europeans, which is really they want to be friends. They want to be allies. They feel the transatlantic alliance has worked. But at the same time, they are not going to be pushed around. And they are going to increasingly take responsibility for their own destiny. Merz talked about a rift in the transatlantic alliance. He talked about how the old order was gone. And those are big things to hear from him. Like what I would say, Anna, for your U.S. audience, is Merz is the kind of guy who in normal times would be the European best friend of the United States. He is a conservative politician. He's a businessman. He worked for BlackRock, a U.S. company. He is an Atlanticist. He was the chair of Atlantica Brücke, which means Atlantic Bridge. He wants to love the United States. He wants to be a friend of the U.S. But he was very clear today that he is seeing real challenges in the relationship. And he was clear that Europe needs to step up and Europe needs to take responsibility for its own destiny.
Let's talk about relationships closer to home here in the U.S. The president not only criticized Canada's prime minister in Davos, he routinely threatens to ratchet up tariffs and has repeatedly said Canada should be the 51st state. It's been more than a year since I know you left your post as finance minister there. How do you think this current government's handling the threats made by President Trump?
I think Canadians are very proud of how our government and our whole country is responding to the U.S. And, you know, I would describe our approach, Anna, as the one that I took when I renegotiated NAFTA, when I negotiated what is now the USMCA with the first Trump administration. I was foreign minister then. I was the lead negotiator. We had a rough time. You know, there was a moment when then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, one of President Trump's advisors, said there should be a special place in hell for him. The president said some not flattering things about me. But at the end of the day, we got to a deal. And our motto in the negotiations was, we do not escalate, but we do not back down. And I think that is the approach you're going to see from all Canadians. Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister of Canada, Conservative Prime Minister, I'm a Liberal, has said that Canada should be prepared to pay any price to defend our sovereignty. And I think that's a view shared by the vast majority of Canadians. Also, we want to be your friends.
We want to be your friends, too. I can speak from the American public. We love Canada. We did see a rare bipartisan rebuke of President Trump's tariffs this week, the tariffs that he put on Canada, with the House voting to rescind those tariffs, including Republicans, members of his party. Trump will most likely veto this legislation if it reaches his desk. But what do these sort of defections tell you?
You know what? I think they tell me that at the end of the day, Americans are sensible, reasonable people who understand the value of a positive relationship with their friends, neighbors, and allies. And, you know, Anna, because Canada is so much smaller than the United States, something that Americans don't always appreciate is we are your best customer. The United States exports more to Canada than it does to China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. And I think it's Americans who invented the great phrase, the customer is always right. You know, the Canada-U.S. relationship, I think, is one of the great win-win relationships in history. The fact that you have had a good friend, a good customer all along your northern border is one of the reasons the United States has been so successful. And we'd like to keep on going. President Trump described the USMCA as the best trade deal ever. I agree with him. So let's keep a good thing going.
Now he's calling it irrelevant.
Well, let's just say we're going to need to just keep on working. We're going to need to keep on working with all of our friends and partners in the United States. The thing about economic facts is they have a real gravitational force. And the reason that I am ultimately confident in the Canada-US relationship is it is truly a win-win relationship. I think the vast majority of Americans understand that. And what you're going to hear from your Canadian friends and neighbors is we will not escalate, but we will not back down. And let's get back to a win-win relationship that has allowed both of our countries to prosper for generations.
Former Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Secretary Clinton, so thank you for that. And you got.
You really mean that?
Yes, I do. I do, and you got several rounds of applause there. But I'm really interested in the line that our discussion is having already, which is a battle within the West between conservatism and liberalism. But I don't think we would be having this discussion at all if it weren't for some of the positions the US administration has taken. And let me take one of them, which is Ukraine, which is obviously at the center of the Munich discussions in the past couple of years. And the line that the Trump administration has taken in trying to resolve the Ukraine conflict following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and its apparent thrust to accept Russia's territorial encroachment on Ukraine. And to you, I absolutely, I understand, and we've had various versions of it already, your characterization of a clash between conservative and liberal values being, at the heart of what's going on in the West. But in this particular one, a security issue, one that involves international law, whether countries still respect those international laws laid down after the Second World War, do you think that that brings a new rift within the West? Ukraine, the US's position.
You're talking to me?
Yes, I am.
I think that the Trump administration's position toward Ukraine is disgraceful. I think the effort to force Ukraine into a surrender deal with Putin is shameful. I think the effort that Putin and Trump are making to profit off the misery and death of the Ukrainian people is a historic error and corrupt to the nth degree. And so I believe Ukraine is fighting for our democracy and our values of freedom and civilization on the front lines, losing thousands of people and having their country destroyed by one man's mania to control them. And I think Trump either doesn't understand or could care less about that suffering. So that's what I think.
And so do you think he has destroyed the West, to go to our title?
He has betrayed the West. He's betrayed human values. He's betrayed the NATO Charter, the Atlantic Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A lot of what has been done before to try to make sense of how difficult it is to restrain people who want unaccountable power. And none of us in this room, including all of us on this panel, would choose to live under a regime that was so unaccountable that it could act with impunity the way that Putin does, except that's who Trump is modeling himself
I don't think we would be having this debate under that kind of regime, for sure. We will come back, I suspect, to the conservatism and liberalism clash within the West, but thank you for that. Peter, do you agree that the Trump administration's actions on Ukraine have produced a rift in the West?
Well, first, I think you really don't like him.
That is absolutely true. But I really, not only do I not like him, I don't like him because of what he's doing to the United States and the world. And I think you should take a hard look at it if you think that there is something good that will come out of it.
Well,
Peter,
what I think Trump is doing in America, I think it is reaction for something for some policies that really went too far too far from the regular people,
Like
too,
what? Give
too
us some
far from
examples.
reality. So, you know, we saw the cancel culture. We saw the woke revolution. I don't agree with the gender revolution, the climate alarmism.
Which gender? Women having their rights?
No, let Peter go on.
I think there are two genders. So, but some of
how about
some
half of us? Can we
some
have
of
our
us
rights?
some of us think that there is more than one or more than two. Sorry, more than two gender. I think there is male and female, and the rest probably is a social construct. So this is something that went too far.
But does that justify selling out the people of Ukraine who are on the front lines dying to save their freedom and their two genders, if that's what you're worried about?
Can I please finish my points? I'm sorry that it makes you nervous. I'm really sorry for that.
It makes me nervous. It makes me
But seriously, can we let Peter finish, please? Can we let Peter finish, please?
I have to say one more thing. You said that Ukraine fights for our future and for our freedom. I think first Ukraine fights for Ukraine's future, Ukraine's freedom, and Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. So we should help them, of course. But what I see in some people in the West, they are trying to misuse help the Ukraine. But that's another question. I don't know if Trump's administration is helping the Ukraine to stop the war. I believe that there is such an approach. I don't see any other strong geopolitical player who would be able to force Russia to stop killing the Ukraine people and stop destroying their country. I don't see. Maybe China, but China makes nothing. I don't know if the pressure, if Trump is forcing Russia in the way that they will stop the war. I don't know. I only see that the only Americans right at the moment can make it. I see the dialogue.
Do you think Europe could put more pressure on Russia, for example, by putting pressure on Turkey, by targeting the refineries of oil more, and so on?
I think Europe also makes some pressure. We release sanctions. We do what we can. But I think the Russians, they probably don't care. When I visited Ukraine, I saw the goodwill of all people in Ukraine. They were really united and willing to stop the war. But
they're keeping fighting. They seem to be.
They also made some steps that probably a year ago no one from them would allow to say or even suggest. Now they are ready to make some steps back. Now it's ball on the Russian side, but I don't see any goodwill on their side. So
indeed, we probably are agreed on that point.
From the audience, one of the
Thank you very much. We gather here today as members of a historic alliance, an alliance that saved and changed the world. You know, when this conference began in 1963, it was in a nation, actually it was on a continent, that was divided against itself. The line between communism and freedom ran through the heart of Germany. The first barbed fences of the Berlin Wall had gone up just 2 years prior. And just months before that first conference, before our predecessors first met here in Munich, the Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear destruction. Even as World War II still burned fresh in the memory of Americans and Europeans alike, we found ourselves staring down the barrel of a new global catastrophe, one with the potential for a new kind of destruction, more apocalyptic and final than anything before in the history of mankind. The time of that first gathering, Soviet communism was on the march. Thousands of years of Western civilization hung in the balance. At that time, victory was far from certain. But we were driven by a common purpose. We were unified not just by what we were fighting against. We were unified by what we were fighting for. And together, Europe and America prevailed. and a continent was rebuilt. Our people prospered. In time, the East and West blocks were reunited. A civilization was once again made whole. That infamous wall that had cleaved this nation into two came down, and with it an evil empire. And the East and West became one again. But the euphoria of this triumph led us to a dangerous delusion that we had entered, quote, the end of history, that every nation would now be a liberal democracy, that the ties formed by trade and by commerce alone would now replace nationhood, that the rules-based global order, an overused term, would now replace the national interest, and that we would now live in a world without borders where everyone became a citizen of the world. This was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and it ignored the lessons of over 5,000 years of recorded human history. And it has cost us dearly. In this delusion, we embraced a dogmatic vision of free and unfettered trade, even as some nations protected their economies and subsidized their companies to systematically undercut ours, shuttering our plants, resulting in large parts of our societies being deindustrialized, shipping millions of working and middle-class jobs overseas, and handing control of our critical supply chains to both adversaries and rivals. We increasingly outsourced our sovereignty to international institutions while many nations invested in massive welfare states at the cost of maintaining the ability to defend themselves. This, even as other countries have invested in the most rapid military buildup in all of human history and have not hesitated to use hard power to pursue their own interests. To appease a climate cult, we have imposed energy policies on ourselves that are impoverishing our people, even as our competitors exploit oil and coal and natural gas and anything else, not just to power their economies, but to use as leverage against our own. And in a pursuit of a world without borders, we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people. We made these mistakes together. And now, together, we owe it to our people to face those facts and to move forward, to rebuild. Under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration, driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. And while we are prepared, if necessary, to do this alone, it is our preference and it is our hope to do this together with you, our friends here in Europe. For the United States and Europe, we belong together. America was founded 250 years ago, but the roots began here on this continent long before. The men who settled and built the nation of my birth arrived on our shores carrying the memories and the traditions and the Christian faith of their ancestors as a sacred inheritance, an unbreakable link between the old world and the new. We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own. National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions. They are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. It was here, in Europe, where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here, in Europe, which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future. But only if we are unapologetic in our heritage and proud of this common inheritance can we together begin the work of envisioning and shaping our economic and our political future. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across the West. Together, we can reindustrialize our economies and rebuild our capacity to defend our people. But the work of this new alliance should not be focused just on military cooperation and reclaiming the industries of the past. It should also be focused on together advancing our mutual interests in new frontiers, unshackling our ingenuity, our creativity, and the dynamic spirit to build a new Western century. Commercial space travel and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, industrial automation and flex manufacturing, creating a Western supply chain for critical minerals not vulnerable to extortion from other powers, and a unified effort to compete for market share in the economies of the global South. Together, we can not only take back control of our own industries and supply chains, we can prosper in the areas that will define the 21st century. But we must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia. It is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our societies and the survival of our civilization itself. And finally, we can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nations. We do not need to abandon the system of international cooperation we authored, and we don't need to dismantle the global institutions of the old order that together we built. But these must be reformed. These must be rebuilt. For example, the United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it has no answers and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership that freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless to constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran. That required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombers. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special forces to bring this fugitive to justice. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions. But we do not live in a perfect world. And we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law which they themselves routinely violate. This is the path that President Trump and the United States has embarked upon. It is the path we ask you here in Europe to join us on. It is a path we have walked together before and hope to walk together again. For 5 centuries, before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain, and the rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end, and that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before, and this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest
Thank you very much, Kennedy Ken. Greatly appreciate it, brother.
Civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance is the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear. Fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny. Not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations. An alliance that does not allow its power to be outsourced, constrained, or subordinated to systems beyond its control. One that does not depend on others for the critical necessities of its national life. and one that does not maintain the polite pretense that our way of life is just one among many, and that asks for permission before it acts. And above all, an alliance based on the recognition that we, the West, have inherited together, what we have inherited together is something that is unique and distinctive and irreplaceable, because this, after all, is the very foundation of the transatlantic bond. Acting together in this way, we will not just help recover a sane foreign policy, it will restore to us a clearer sense of ourselves. It will restore a place in the world. And in so doing, it will rebuke and deter the forces of civilizational erasure that today menace both America and Europe alike. So in a time of headlines heralding the end of the transatlantic era, let it be known and clear to all that this is neither our goal nor our wish. Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe. Our story began with an Italian explorer whose adventure into the great unknown to discover a new world brought Christianity to the Americas and became the legend that defined the imagination of our pioneer nation. Our first colonies were built by English settlers, to whom we owe not just the language we speak, but the whole of our political and legal system. Our frontiers were shaped by Scots-Irish, that proud, hardy clan from the hills of Ulster that gave us Davy Crockett and Mark Twain and Teddy Roosevelt and Neil Armstrong. Our great Midwestern heartland was built by German farmers and craftsmen who transformed empty plains into a global agricultural powerhouse. And by the way, dramatically upgraded the quality of American beer. Our expansion into the interior followed the footsteps of French fur traders and explorers whose names, by the way, still adorn the street signs and town names all across the Mississippi Valley. Our horses, our ranches, our rodeos, the entire romance of the cowboy archetype that became synonymous with the American West. These were born in Spain. And our largest and most iconic city was named New Amsterdam before it was named New York. And you know that in the year that my country was founded, Lorenzo and Catalina Giraldi lived in Casal Monferrato in the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. And Jose and Manuel Arena lived in Sevilla, Spain. I don't know what, if anything, they knew about the 13 colonies which had gained their independence from the British Empire. But here's what I'm certain of. They could have never imagined that 250 years later, one of their direct descendants would be back here today on this continent as the chief diplomat of that infant nation. And yet here I am, reminded by my own story that both our histories and our fates will always be linked. Together we rebuilt a shattered continent in the wake of 2 devastating world wars. When we found ourselves divided once again by the Iron Curtain, the Free West linked arms with the courageous dissidents struggling against tyranny in the East to defeat Soviet communism. We have fought against each other, then reconciled, then fought, then reconciled again. And we have bled and died side by side on battlefields from Kapyong to Kandahar. And I'm here today to leave it clear that America is charting the path for a new century of prosperity, and that once again, we want to do it together with you, our cherished allies and our oldest friends. We want to do it together with you, with a Europe that is proud of its heritage and of its history, with a Europe that has the spirit of creation and liberty that sent ships out into uncharted seas and birthed our civilization, with a Europe that has the means to defend itself and the will to survive. We should be proud of what we achieved together in the last century. But now we must confront and embrace the opportunities of a new one. Because yesterday is over. The future is inevitable. And our destiny together awaits. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure you heard the sigh of relief through this hall when we were just listening to what I would interpret as a message of reassurance, of partnership. You spoke of intertwined relations between the United States and Europe. Reminds me of statements made decades ago by your predecessors when the discussion was, is actually America a European power? Is America a power in Europe? Thank you for offering this message of reassurance about our partnership. This is actually not the first time that Marco Rubio is here at the Munich Security Conference. He's been here before, a couple of times, but it's the first time he has been, and he is the speaker as Secretary of State. So thank you again. We have only a couple of minutes now for just a few questions. And if I may, we collected questions from the audience. One of the sort of key issues here yesterday, today, is of course, continues to be the question of how to deal with the war in Ukraine. Many of us in the discussions of the last day, last 24 hours, have voiced their impression that the Russians, let me put it colloquially, the Russians are playing for time. They're not really interested in a meaningful settlement. There is no indication that they're willing to compromise on any of their maximalist objectives. Offer to us, if you could, your assessment of where we are and where you think we can go.
Well, I think where we are at this point is that the issues at play that have to be, here's the good news. The good news is that the issues that need to be confronted to end this war have been narrowed. That's the good news. The bad news is they've been narrowed to the hardest questions to answer, and work remains to be done in that front. I hear your point about, well, the answer is we don't know. We don't know if the Russians are serious about ending the war. They say they are, and under what terms they were willing to do it, and whether we can find terms that are acceptable to Ukraine upon that Russia will always agree to. But we're going to continue to test it. In the meantime, everything else continues to happen. The United States has imposed additional sanctions on Russia's oil. In our conversations with India, we've gotten their commitment to stop buying additional Russian oil. Europe has taken its set of steps moving forward. The Pearl program continues, in which American weaponry is being sold for the Ukrainian war effort. So all these things continue. Nothing has stopped in the interim. So there's no buying of time here in that regard. What we can't answer, but we're going to continue to test, is whether there is an outcome that Ukraine can live with and that Russia will accept. And I would say it's been elusive up to this point. We've made progress in the sense that for the first time, I think, in years, at least at the technical level, there were military officials from both sides that met together last week, and there'll be meetings again on Tuesday, although it may not be the same group of people. Look, we're going to continue to do everything we can to play this role of bringing this war to the end. I don't think anybody in this room would be against a negotiated settlement to this war, so long as the conditions are just and sustainable. And that's what we aim to achieve, and we're going to continue to try to achieve it, even as all these other things continue to happen on the sanctions front and so forth.
Thank you very much. I'm sure if we had more time, there would be many questions on Ukraine. But let me conclude by asking a question about something entirely different. The next speaker here in just a couple of minutes will be the Foreign Minister of China. When you served in the Senate, sir, people considered you a kind of a China hawk.
So did they.
So did they.
Yeah.
We know that there will be, in about 2 months' time, a summit meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. Give us your expectation. Are you optimistic? Can there be a quote-unquote deal with China? What do you expect?
Well, I would say this. The two largest economies in the world, two of the big powers on the planet, we have an obligation to communicate with them and talk, and so do many of you on a bilateral basis as well. I mean, it would be geopolitical malpractice to not be in conversations with China. I would say this, because we're two large countries with huge global interests, our national interests will often not align. Their national interest and ours will not align, and we owe it to the world to try to manage those as best we can, obviously avoiding conflict, both economic and worse. And so it's important for us to have communications with them in that regard. On areas in which our interests are aligned, I think we can work together to make positive impact on the world, and we seek opportunities to do that with them. But we have to have a relationship with China, and many of the countries represented here today are going to have a relationship with China, always understanding that nothing that we agree to could come at the expense of our national interest. And frankly, we expect China to act in their national interest, as we expect every nation state to act in their national interest. And the goal of diplomacy is to try to navigate those times in which our national interests come into conflict with one another, always hoping to do it peacefully. I think we also have a special obligation, because whatever happens between the US and China on trade has a global implication. So there are long-term challenges that we face that we're going to have to confront, that are going to be irritants in our relationship with China. That's not just true for the United States, that's true for the broader West. But I do think we need to try to manage those the best we can to avoid, unnecessary friction if it's possible. But no one is under any illusions. There are some fundamental challenges between our countries and between the West and China that will continue for the foreseeable future for a variety of reasons. And it's some of the things we hope to work together with you on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We've run out of time. I'm sorry that I can't take questions from all those who wanted to ask questions. Mr. Secretary of State, thank you for this message of reassurance. I think this is much appreciated here in the hall. Let's offer a round of applause.
We shouldn't get in the warm bath of complacency and think that, therefore, all we're really doing is reasserting the continuation of what we've had for the last 80 years. That would be a mistake, and it'd be a particular mistake for Europe, because my strong view is that Europe hasn't done enough in its own defense and security for many years.
Under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration, driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. And while we are prepared, if necessary, to do this alone, it is our preference and it is our hope to do this together with you, our friends here in Europe.
And just to be clear, the special report put out before this conference began labels Trump, quote, the demolition man. And its authors warned that we're entering an era of, quote, wrecking ball politics, with the US-led post-1945 international order now under destruction. Serious stuff indeed. And so I asked the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer for their red lines and roadmap for the future defence and survival of Europe.
I was very much reassured by the speech of the Secretary of State. We know him. He's a good friend, a strong ally. Indeed, this was for me very reassuring to listen to him. We know that in the administration some have a harsher tone on these topics, but the Secretary of State was very clear. He said, we want a strong Europe in the alliance. And this is what we are working for intensively in the European Union. We have to be an independent Europe, not a Europe that is leaning on someone, but a Europe that is going forward with friends and allies, together facing the challenges that are out there.
I thought the Secretary of State's speech was consistent with the argument that Ursula made in her remarks a moment ago and the argument I'm making. I think it's really clear, though, that we shouldn't get in the warm bath of complacency and think that, therefore, all we're really doing is reasserting the continuation of what we've had for the last 80 years. That would be a mistake, and it'd be a particular mistake for Europe, because my strong view is that Europe hasn't done enough in its own defence and security for many years, because we will only be able to preserve NATO in the way it is needed for the next 80 years if we change and strengthen the European dimension. That is something which a number of American presidents have said for some time. I believe to be true, and I think we've got to seize this movement to move forward, not to pull apart the transatlantic relationship, but to make sure it works in the circumstances and the times that we face.
The current Secretary General of NATO, after Trump's Davos speech, actually after Prime Minister Carney's speech, which talked about a rupture, he said, if you all are thinking that you can do what you have to do without the United States, then dream on. It's not going to happen. So how long do you think it'll take to get to this posture that you both say you need to get to?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we're not looking at a future that tears us apart from the Euro-Atlantic alliance that we have. NATO has been the single most effective and successful military alliance the world has ever known, and we should never move away from it. But I think simply sitting where we are isn't good enough, and therefore the change does need to come. That needs Europe to be stronger, to be working more closely together, and that's why I said what I said about the UK-EU relationship. We're 10 years on from Brexit. We are not the Britain of the Brexit years. We're a Britain that wants to work with the EU even more closely in light of the challenge that we face here 10 years on.
But you also said, and I want to get to the bottom of this, that some red lines have been crossed and they cannot be uncrossed. You were talking about the United States in your speech, I think. What red lines are you talking about? Because there is a massive deficit of trust between many people in the alliance and certainly leaders who are now having to do what you're doing. Workarounds, de-risking, decoupling, whatever you might want to call it, independence. What red lines have been crossed that cannot be uncrossed?
So, for example, I want to be very clear, our digital sovereignty is our digital sovereignty. Very clear on that one. And we have a long tradition in freedom of speech. Actually, the Enlightenment started on our continent. And we are very clear with digital sovereignty also that what is forbidden offline is forbidden online. And we will not flinch what that is concerned. We will be very steadfast to pursue this very clear demand for us.
About Ukraine, because, again, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, barely mentioned it except for an elusive peace, he said those words. Now, President Trump has said in his latest comments that Ukraine, President Zelensky needs to get onto it because Russia wants a deal, these are his words, and President Zelensky needs to get onto it right now, otherwise he's going to miss a great opportunity. Secretary Rubio did not go to your meeting, your leaders' meeting with President Zelensky last night. Where do you think this all stands? Where do the negotiations stand? Is it Zelensky who needs to be pressured?
So I think it's extremely important that we do not buy in the Russian narrative. And this has been out too much there. I mean, if we look at the strategic goals and the military goals of Putin, it's a huge failure. He wanted to Russify Ukraine. Ukraine has become European. He wanted to stop NATO. NATO has gotten bigger with Sweden and Finland. He wanted to occupy Ukraine within days or weeks. Well, now we are unfortunately in the 4th year of the war. And I think it is so important that we, on our side, tell the truth, what is going on in Russia, with a war economy, with skyrocketing interest rates and inflation, completely isolated. And now this is a war of attrition. And in this war of attrition, it is of utmost importance that we push forward the negotiations and put pressure on Putin that he finally comes to the negotiation table.
So I need to ask you a political question because a lot of people at home are interested. You've just spoken about the amount of money that needs to be spent on the Ukraine defense, on Britain, on Europe. That takes politics and convincing. I want to ask you, do you think you narrowly just miss being toppled? Do you think that what's happening in the politics at home is distracting you and perhaps making you vulnerable to a Brexit follow, the Reform Party or even maybe the Conservatives who might not want to pursue the kind of politics that you want to pursue?
No, I reject that. I ended the week much stronger than I started it, and that's a very good place to be. And my party and my government is completely united on the question of Ukraine and defence and security and the need for stronger relations with Europe on defence, on security and on economy as well. And so I think that there is real strength in the position I've now set out. I think there'll be the whole of the government is united behind that. I think actually it unites across the House of Commons. Not everybody, I accept. Reform have a different agenda. They're pro-Putin. We know where they stand. Imagine if they were in government in the United Kingdom. The coalition of the willing could not exist with UK participation in it. We would not be seen as a leader on the European or international stage. We would be seen as a country that people couldn't do business with. So it's not universal across our parliament, but there's a very strong feeling amongst right-minded politicians that we stick together on Ukraine. So for all of the divisions that you never to get in politics, there are some real clarity and some real certainty on these key issues.
Too, that we have such a full audience today, and I'm encouraged.
Of course, extremely important. We are very satisfied that NATO is now into working with security in the Arctic region in a more structured way. We have, by the way, asked for this for several years, but as you know, there's been this idea about low tension. It sounds very nice on a paper, but it doesn't reflect reality and the world that we are living in, unfortunately. So what we have suggested NATO is to be permanent present in the Arctic region, also in and around Greenland. Now we have Arctic Sentry as a framework. We have to put substance into it. The good thing about Arctic Sentry is that it's a flexible way of working, so it can be changed, it can be moved, it can be on a high level, it can be on a lower level, so it can, reply to the challenges that we see. If we come, when I look at NATO, I see we have, of course, an eastern flank. We have everybody knows about that. By the way, nowadays, today, that's the most important one. It's where most of our capabilities should be used for. We have a southern flank, counterterrorism, and probably one day we will see that somebody tries, Russia of course, to use migrants from the southern part of NATO, as we have seen in Belarus and in Finland. We have a new flank when it comes to AI. Space, quantum physics, but we also have a northern flank. It's not where we have the most challenges today, and the Arctic region is enormous, and we have more issues in other parts of the Arctic region than we have around Greenland. Also important to say, but the world is changing, and so is the weather because of climate change. So at some point, we really have to be aware about what Russia and China will do around Greenland, but we are not there yet. But it's good to be, before things happen. So for us, Arctic Sentry is a very, very good thing. Let me just finalize this by saying we have to have the Arctic region reflected in our capability targets. Allow me to be a bit technical, but the capability targets we are seeing in NATO today does not reflect the high north and the Arctic region. And if we can change this, my suggestion would be to have industrial targets afterwards, because many of the capabilities we need in the Arctic region haven't been produced yet. Some of them has to be produced in US, and the production lines are not really replying to the needs we have. The same goes for Europe. So I hope this answers some of your questions. If you are interested in the more political part of this. I'll come back to that.
We will definitely get to the political side of it. We also want to just take a moment. The Prime Minister mentioned Greenland as being obviously a big part of Arctic security. Mr. Prime Minister, can you walk us through, give us a little sense of the view from Greenland?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I will be a bit more political, I think, in my start, because Greenland has been a center of attention for quite a long time now. And this topic has been filling the media. And from a Greenlandic perspective, we have been living in our region in peace and in low tension for many years. But we have also recognized in Greenland that I don't think there is any low tension areas in the world anymore, and we need to be a part of building up capabilities and taking our share in surveillance and in security in our region. And that's why I'm perfectly aligned, and we work really close together in terms of security in our area. And we are also very happy to have the NATO Arctic Sentry in Greenland. I think it's a step in a really good direction. But I will also mention, as Mette mentioned, that talks about the Russian and Chinese ships around our region in Greenland. It's not now, but we are not naive, and we see the longer perspective. When our routes in the northwest and the northeast they melt, there might be more traffic. But what we are aligned on, and the most important thing is that we will do more, and we are willing to lift our responsibility in Greenland to make that happen with our allies in the NATO alliance. And it's very important for me to say that the Arctic Sentry and the NATO alliance is something that we are truly committed on as Greenlanders. Transatlantic cooperation and international rule of law and so on, that's deeply in our values. But thank you for being able to attend this panel.
Thank you very much. So thank you both for setting the scene here. I want to start with our host here, Minister Pistorius. Both the Prime Ministers mentioned Arctic Sentry. You just came from a NATO meeting where this is now the new NATO mission that's just started this week in Greenland. Despite the fact we've been hearing quite a bit about it, it's not really clear what it is. Is it a rotation? Is it a long-term presence? How many troops are involved? You dispatched I think about a dozen German troops to Greenland several weeks ago to do an assessment. What did they tell you, and what is Arctic Sentry?
Mette answered that question already when she said Arctic Sentry is a framework. It's something we can put in and take out what is needed and what is not needed any longer. So what we start with is some Eurofighters from Germany, air fueling, and P-8 Poseidon in the weeks to come. So we put in everything we can do, like other NATO allies too. And we watch the situation, we are seeing what's going on, and we can react in the way which is appropriate. This is Arctic Sentry, and it's a framework is so decisive from my perspective, since everybody, I think, in this room too, believes we never were busy with the Arctic before. That's not true. I mean, we have been knowing all the time that the Arctic is relevant. I've been in Norway, in the northern, very high north of Norway 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, and having another view on the globe from the very north is totally different than looking at it from Berlin or from wherever, from Washington, for example. So it is another perspective, and it shows very impressively how the distances changes and the hemispheres of influence of the powers of the world, like Russia, like China, like the United States, and of course the European countries in the high north. So it is about to prepare for, to prove that we have understood years ago already of the relevance of the Arctic. And to be honest, the discussion of Greenland, of course, had an impact on that. But to be clear, it's the same point is, it never was about, from the Washington perspective, about security when it came to Greenland. It was about other issues to remain diplomatic. So Therefore, it's very important to do that, because it shows, okay, you are concerned when it comes to the security of Greenland. We are concerned about the security of the Arctic, including Greenland, and therefore we take part in everything what happens there, of course, always in the framework of NATO and not just alone.
You've both mentioned Russia and China as possible threats in the Arctic. I think that's what we usually hear about when they talk about the potential threat. So I want to unpack each of those. Foreign Minister Anand, can you take Russia? What is the threat that Russia poses now in the Arctic, and how is that evolving if it's not maybe a direct threat right now?
So after the illegal and unjustifiable further invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we have seen Russian infrastructure move further and further north towards the Arctic Circle. The geopolitical environment is shifting rapidly, and that is one way in which it is doing so. From Canada's perspective, we have the second largest country in the world. 40% of our land mass interfaces with the Arctic. 70% of Canada's coastline interfaces with the Arctic. So this is a very real and important shift in the geopolitical environment that we must acknowledge. In addition to climate change, which is melting the polar ice caps and making transition through the Northwest Passage, for example, much different than it has been in previous decades. The fact of the matter is that Canada, while we are appreciative and support Arctic Sentry, we are also taking the bull by the horns and ensuring that we are now ramping up our investments and infrastructure in the Arctic. And this isn't a decision we took today or even yesterday. In the past years, we have been launching procurements for over-the-horizon radar, for Arctic icebreakers, in addition to the ones we already have, for NORAD modernization. And here, I will say that we are very closely partnered with the United States in terms of continental defense. So when we think about the Arctic, we have to ensure that it's not just NATO that we are focused on. NORAD, and in particular the role that Canada and the United States play in aerial surveillance over the Canadian Arctic, is extremely relevant and important. These two systems of collaboration are complementary. And the fact of the matter is that we need to all acknowledge the changing global threat environment and the importance of supporting each other, collaborating with each other in terms of our capabilities in the Arctic and our diplomacy in the Arctic. And the final point I'll make is we have an Arctic foreign policy, and we've had one for years. We opened a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland. Thank you for hosting us, because we believe in expanding our presence in the Arctic, and we want to do that in collaboration, especially for purposes of Indigenous peoples and Inuit, the original owners of the land. We will also open a consulate in Anchorage this year for the very same reason. Our approach is collaborative. Our approach is one in which we build together through multilateral organizations and partnerships.
It's okay, you can clap. We love claps. We love applause. Senator Murkowski, the foreign minister laid out Russia's really growing opportunities, I guess, to get closer to the United States, to North America, to Canada, as times are evolving. What about the threat from China? How has that, is it a threat right now? Are you seeing that manifest in any way? And again, how is that one changing?
The short answer is yes. The short answer is yes, in terms of what we're seeing with China. And it's not just with China. We've seen China up in the Arctic on doing research or mapping, whatever it is they may say they're doing. But the new factor here is what is happening together in cooperation with Russia. Whether it is the joint bomber operations that we are seeing flying over the north that we are sending up our fighters to intercept, whether it is the Coast Guard and naval vessels that are operating jointly. Used to be the Russians would lead, now we're seeing actually the Chinese lead some of this. So what we're seeing is what is unusual. Now, you have mentioned the proximity to Russia, and I think particularly when we're sitting here in Munich, it's easy to just think about the eastern side and the threat from Russia from here. But for us in Alaska, it is very real. It is every day. It is 2 miles. 2 miles between Little Diomede, which is US, and Big Diomede, which is Russian. 57 miles from basically the shoreline of Alaska to the shoreline of Russia. So it is real. We see it. We feel it. And I think the geography hasn't changed. I'm fascinated, too, that we have such a full audience today, and I'm encouraged by it, but I'm just going to tell you, the map hasn't changed. Alaska was always sitting there. Canada occupies as much of the Arctic as it does. Greenland is massive. The geography hasn't changed, but the threats have changed, and the threats have changed because we have seen the warming temperatures due to climate change that are opening up these avenues of commerce. We are seeing the threats to infrastructure that we had previously built up in the Arctic that are now challenged. We are seeing changes to this threat because of this combined operation or cooperation between Russia and China. And this is why we need the alliances that we have. This is why we need the NORAD cooperation, why we need a strong NATO alliance, why NORAD and NATO must be working in tandem with one another. Because the alliance that we're seeing with China and Russia right now, think about where else on the globe they're partnering. They're working together. It's in the Arctic. Mm-hmm. So that should send as much a message as we need about why the Arctic matters right now from a security perspective. So there is much that must be done, and I'll end my comment. Several of you have noted high north, low tension. It came to my attention yesterday that somebody said it should be high north, low attention. Oh. Because in fairness, we have not been paying attention to the Arctic as we need to from a security perspective. We've made investments in the past, and we've walked away. And now we want the opportunity to dust them off, to build them back up, at what cost? That's why we're here.
So I was very struck by the Munich Security Conference. When you go on their website, there's this highly produced video, and it's an elephant that's walking, and it says, we're going to address the elephant in the room. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room because, yes, there are these threats, but one of the major reasons I suspect that a lot of people are here tonight, in addition, obviously, to seeing everyone who's up on stage, is the fact that President Trump has been talking about the U.S. owning Greenland. So I just want to get that out. He spoke about it again yesterday. Madam Prime Minister, he said last night that the United States is in negotiations to take Greenland. You've said in the past that he should be taken seriously when he's talking about these things. Do you believe that President Trump still wants to own Greenland?
Unfortunately, I think the desire is the same. It's something we, of course, talk a lot about. And I would also add that I think the pressure on Greenland is totally unacceptable. We are talking about threats, but as you often say, Jens Frege, the people of Greenland have never been threatened before by anyone. So I think the pressure is unacceptable. I think we have been very clear from Greenland and Denmark and by the way, from all of our allies, Canada and Europe, and good friends in the US, that there are, of course, things that you cannot compromise on. Our basic values, the cornerstone, of our democracy is, of course, the respect of other states' sovereignty and territorial integrity, and, by the way, a people's right for self-determination. There's a very proud people living in Greenland. So there are things that we cannot compromise on, and that, by the way, we will not compromise on. But there are other things we can do together, and we have already been talking a lot about it. We have as many of you probably know, a defense agreement, the Kingdom of Denmark and US. We have had it since 1951. It gives a very, it's very easy for US to have a stronger footprint in Greenland. At some stage they had 17 bases and 10,000 soldiers. Now there's one base and 200, 230, 40 something people there. We have always been a very reliable, strong partner for US. So if it's a question about home defense, if it's a question about common security, we will always like to work together with the US. So that is possible, but no. Everybody asks us, do we think it's over? No, we don't think it's over. We now have a working group. It's good. We will try to see if we can find a solution, and you can rely on us. You can trust us. We will do whatever we can, but of course there are red lines that will not be crossed, and we will stick to our strategy.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to add that I don't think it's an elephant in the room anymore. He's pretty transparent and has been for 14 months, and the pressure on the Greenlandic people.